We will welcome on stage also Krzysztof Cybulski, who just spoke a minute ago about Apparatum. As you know, I mentioned this at the very beginning, that sound is a special focus this year, and that's why we decided to invite people from different fields to talk about how to use sound in their everyday artistic practice. So now we will welcome on stage radio producer Cathy FitzGerald. I don't know if Arkadiusz Reikowski managed to get to us, but we also wanted to invite him to this speech, but if he didn't, maybe he will in a moment. But Cathy, please join us on stage. And as I said, Krzysztof Cybulski from Pan Generator again, and the discussion will be moderated by Bartek Chaciński, a journalist and editor of Polityka magazine.
Hello, dzień dobry Państwu. It's going to be my last word in Polish, sadly for me. The title of this panel is Sound as a Tool of Immersion, and my name is Bartek Chaciński. I'm working for a paper, for a weekly called Polityka, writing mostly about sounds, but sounds organized as music. And I was very happy when I was invited to this panel, because I'm going to learn some more about sound as a narrative tool, as sound as an independent tool for building audio stories. Cathy FitzGerald is making audio stories as such. Was given numerous awards for her audio stories, and is also teaching people in the school named Strange and Charmed. This is a school.
Do you want me to rescue you?
Yeah, rescue me. Tell me something more about this school for starters, because.
Okay, so I'd been making documentaries for about 10 years, and I got to that point where I thought, oh, maybe I can just about do this. And I always had this fantasy of when I was young, I thought it'd be quite nice to be a Victorian school teacher in a village, and with your own blackboard. So I live out in the country, and now I have a blackboard, and I kind of lure people out into the country and teach them about audio storytelling and about making documentaries.
Krzysztof Cybulski, you may know already because he was speaking about his Apparatum installation a few minutes ago. He's a member of Pan Generator collective, which connects physical audio installations, making of brand new instruments, if I'm correct, and doing things using computer code to make music.
Yeah, so we like to say that we connect bits and atoms. So we try to connect the physical world with the code and the virtual or digital realm. And also the sound is an important part of our practice and our projects. But I also have a small practice on my own, which is focused more about how to make digitally controlled acoustic sound, which is yet another area of interest.
Okay, and the fourth person on the panel is stuck in a train, which gives us an audio story in itself, and a narrative in itself. Is stuck in the train because our railway was touched by windstorms. So Arkadiusz Reikowski will be here. His voice probably will be here in a moment. He's a composer, he's a creator of many scores for Polish video games like Layers of Fear, like Observer, Colat, etc., etc. Maybe he'll talk something about this. As you may see, we come from completely different areas of sound making, of talking about sound, of using the sound, but we're gonna try to gather a common to find a common ground on the matter of immersion in sound, and to introduce. Because it's complicated to introduce all of the people at the same time, we introduce every one of our panelists one by one, giving an example of their work and letting them make their statements about how immersion is apparent in their works. So let's start by an audio from Cathy FitzGerald work.
What's it called?
Snoosku.
Noosku.
Noosku. Yeah.
What
It's
does noosku mean? A sniff.
Yeah, sniff.
Our
Yeah.
reindeer's called Sniff.
Yes. If you want, he goes forward and fast. You can swing the rope. Go, 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 hop, hop. And if he goes well, you just hang the rope on your hand.
Yeah.
Not too tight, because then he thinks that you're gonna slow down.
I'm driving a sledge through a dark forest at night with the help of Sniff the reindeer. It's -20 and I'm wrapped up in a coat as thick as a duvet. The path's narrow, and as I drive along it, I brush past trees covered in tukkalomi, tree snow, and at the end of the track, a reward for hungry reindeer, dried green lichen.
So this is like a chocolate for the reindeer. Very, very delicious. And they can smell this under 1 meter snow. It's not a strong smell.
No, but it's nice, isn't it?
Yes.
It's very fresh.
Nom 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 nom.
It's got a very frosty nose.
Antsi Lakella, part-time reindeer herder, part-time tour guide, all-time nice bloke.
The fur is so soft.
Yes, it is.
We've stopped in a silent clearing in the nighttime forest.
Never seen the stars so clearly.
Yeah, there is Big Bear.
The big bear,
Yeah.
yeah.
And as you can see, there's not so dark at all.
It's not
Because
so
the
dark.
snow gives a lot of light.
Do the reindeers behave differently when it snows?
When it's very cold, -40. And then it's the weather changes and start to wind from the south and comes more warmer air. Then these reindeers, they're going very happy. So they run around that fence.
So a happy reindeer runs.
Yeah, and they jump like a small rabbit.
Do you talk to your reindeers?
Yeah, sometimes.
Do they ever talk back?
Sometimes they doing like, I feel you. I think everyone should spend a short time with these reindeers
Yeah.
here in between the silence.
Yeah, I like the big winter silence a lot, actually.
Yes.
To have this in your soul,
Yeah.
to have this as the base of who you are,
Yeah.
it's a really strong foundation, isn't it? It's
Yes, and it's very, very personal.
very personal.
Personal feeling and
Yeah, what that it's yours in
Yes.
a way.
My toes are starting to get chilly, so we head back inside. Auntie boils a kettle over the fire, and we drink hot blueberry juice and eat cinnamon rolls.
This was an excerpt of a story about reindeer racing in Finland.
Yeah, so I make documentaries. I make half-an-hour pieces, mostly for the BBC, about anything that I can talk them into that I really want to make. And So I've made things about, grave digging up in Glasgow and yellow cab drivers in the States, why we like looking at blue sky, why we look in mirrors. But this was a half-an-hour piece about reindeer racing. So it's completely crazy. They go out on frozen lakes on weekends and just race behind reindeers at sort of 50 miles an hour on skis. And for me, actually, I chose that piece specifically because I think, for me, immersion takes me back to that. The idea of immersion takes me back to the idea of being a small kid and being under the covers, reading the book, and being so completely lost in another world that there is no time, there is no real world anymore. And I think that came out of a character I identified with. It came out of drama. It came out of really good storytelling. And so I think that that's what I do now. I'm in this incredibly strange, intangible, uncanny medium. I create whole other worlds, and I write, but I write with other people's words. And it's all those little sounds. For me, immersion comes out of, the Velcro on the coat jacket, the crunch of the snow. You probably didn't hear, but there's a beautiful sound at the beginning, which is actually the sound of a reindeer being tickled. Which is one of the best sounds in the world if you've never experienced it. But it's a myriad of tiny cues, just the same way as if you were writing. It's a myriad of tiny cues that come together to form an emotion, an emotional response.
And how's your voice, using your own voice, because it's apparent in it's appearing in your materials, helps you to create this immersion effect?
Yeah, I think so. The presenter in a documentary usually is it's very straight, it's very objective, it's quite authoritarian, it's quite patriarchal, and I just was absolutely not interested in making that at all. It seems completely fake to me. So I wanted to be as close as I could to being myself out loud, and also just to really inhabit that role of the storyteller, because I think that's the other place that immersion comes from. It's that, we respond really immediately to being told a story.
And you are apparently teaching people how to levitate with sound or on sound. Could you explain this for?
So I gave a talk a few years back at Third Coast Audio Festival, which is it's this amazing audio festival in Chicago, and it was called How to Make Your Listener Levitate and Other Magic Tricks. And the idea came from the thought that a really good audio documentary is a bit like a magic carpet. So you start off on the ground and you're in the real world, and then after 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, you should be levitating a little bit off the ground, because what you're listening to is so powerful and so transcendent and so beautiful in some cases that you have kind of forgotten the real world. So yeah, it's sort of how you try and teach someone to do that.
Okay, let's move on to the presentation of Krzysztof Cybulski's work. It's going to be a audio-visual presentation, short excerpt.
Just a few seconds, please. Oh, okay. It's really short and compressed.
there's no need of a musician at the end of this chain, I think. So what have we seen?
Yeah, so actually I have seen two pieces, as you could probably understand. So the first one is something that I mentioned in the introduction, which is the idea of digitally controlled acoustic sound source. The installation of the organ pipes is an attempt to do some so-called Fourier resynthesis with acoustic oscillators, I would say. So there is actually a mathematical formula that can analyze every complex waveform and find the simple waves inside. And in theory, when you combine the simple waveforms again, you should get the input waveform, and it applies to sound as well. So when you analyze a speech, for example, which is a very complex signal, and you try to find at least 5 first simple sinusoidal components, and then you combine them, so you get, for example, 5 sinusoid generators to play exactly the same pitches and the same volumes. So you can hear recognizable speech or singing. And my idea was to replace the electronic or digital oscillators with physical or acoustic oscillators, which are in the form of organ pipes, which are controlled in a similar fashion that you would have in a Chupa Chups lollipop with a whistle that you can change the pitch by moving a small slider. So that's exactly what they do, but they are controlled with motors that are in turn controlled by a computer that calculates where the sliders should be to get to the specific pitch. So this is one of the areas of my interest, and it comes from an observation that actually acoustic sound is much more immersive, I would say, than even the most sophisticated surround system. And I had an experience once that I was playing in a 12-piece folk group, I believe, and it was like a typical Highlander Polish string trio. Then you had a horn section, you had a Mexican percussionist, you had a regular drum set, and I was playing on bass guitar, and we would have a rehearsal in a hotel room, and I was the only one with an amplifier. Everybody sat where they found most comfortable, and the sound was not too loud, not too quiet, it was just right, and there was me in the middle of all this with my amplifier trying to adjust to find the perfect volume. And then they made a dynamic change, started to play forte, and I had to pull up the volume, but then I was again too loud. And I thought the acoustic sound sources are much more natural, which is a truism, for example, of course, but definitely that was a spark that made me look for ways to combine acoustic sound sources with the knowledge and technology we have today and create things that were probably not possible before the computer era, but are still taking advantage of the acoustic sound. And the other part was, I hope it was self-explanatory, more or less. These are small devices that are controlled by sound itself. So again, I'm trying to imitate the situation of improvising with live musicians. So when you play with another musician, sort of free manner or free jazz or any other improvising musical situation, you communicate with sound itself. So I wanted the boxes to respond to sound, and actually there are 2 boxes that have very simple set of rules. The first one reacts to the volume of the sound. The larger the volume, the more complex the drum pattern creates. And the other one, in turn, reacts to the short percussive sounds and creates sort of harmonic, string-like sound. And as you have seen, when we connect them together, they are listening to each other. They only need an initial trigger. And they create an indirect feedback loop. So the sound comes back and forth from the physical movement of the air to the analog signal in the microphone, then digitized, and then again analogized and made acoustic. And so this is happening in real time, and you can interact with them either by playing an actual instrument next to them or by just changing their respective positions, and you can just a small amount of movement change the loop, and they find another stable position which creates another sound. But also two more words, because of course I'm here also representing pan generator. So there is that installation next to the mała czarna, as I mentioned before. But also we are dealing with sound in different ways. Sometimes you just use regular speakers, and we are focusing more on the content of the sound than the way we produce it. But also we were playing with how to make a different use of speakers than usual use. So we, for example, made an array of 95 speakers that had mirrors attached to them, and we used very low frequencies, like inaudible frequencies from 2 Hz up to, let's say, 50 Hz. So you could rather see the movement of the cone, speaker cones with the mirrors, than hear them. So you would like smoothly swipe through the frequencies, and at some point you start to hear it. But this is like trying to reinvent how we can use the speakers, and also we try to make arrays of speakers that are movable. And the idea is that rather than creating like a virtual sound sources, which happens all the time when you use stereo system, for example, we can position anything in between the speakers. We try to have a speaker per sound source, which makes you can more relate to the sound when you have an exact like a physical representation of it, which would be a speaker in this case. So this is maybe
just a short one. Do we find somewhere can we buy or find somewhere these little devices that respond to your sounds that you've shown?
They aren't actually meant. I mean, there are just smartphones inside, so they're way too simple, probably, and not very sophisticated to make a product out of them. So, but I try to use them for my live performances. So sometimes they could be seen, and of course you can play with it. I'll let you know.
Okay, let's move to Arkadiusz Reikowski music. There's some excerpts, a collage of his music, and then if we can establish a connection with Arkadiusz, we're gonna ask him the same question about immersion.
Ashes all rise, the light shall fall. Will you find me? Will you find me? When the sky is dead and forever gone, will you find me? Will you find me?
So, We've got Arkadiusz on the phone, yeah. So, it's like that. That's gonna work. So, I don't know if...
Hello.
Are you hearing us? Hello?
Yeah, I think I can hear something, but I'm not sure what.
Okay, so
yeah, Bartek, is that you? Bartek? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I can hear you now, yes.
Just please tell us a little bit about what the fragments you've presented came from. I mean, the collage of your scores for games. And where are you looking for immersion in your work? Immersion in sound.
Okay. okay. So these were the fragments of my work for video games mostly. It was Observer, my most recent score. It was Layers of Fear soundtrack. It was Father and Son and Collab, which was recorded with Maria Elizabeth McGlynn. And as for the immersion thing, so sound and audio in general is one of the most important aspects of a production, right? So basically, I think it's half the success of a well-received video game. And if the sound is good, it basically can make the events that happen on the screen believable. And if the graphics isn't believable, the sound and music can make up for it. So that there's this whole immersion thing, I think. And I must say I used some pretty interesting tools to control the immersion of players or emotions of players. And the music is often composed with a layered approach. It means that tracks are divided into layers which can be implemented with various intensity into our game engine, and that the music interacts with the player's decisions and thus enhance the experience. So I think that's mostly my work, controlling the emotions of players.
Thank you very much. And could you tell us if your train moved, or are you still stuck in?
Oh my God, I am still stuck in the middle of nowhere. So as soon as I get back in Warsaw, I hope that I will have a chance to meet some of you, at least. Yeah, but I'm not moving anywhere right now.
So fingers crossed that you move soon.
Yeah.
And thank you very, very much for
thank you so much
for this intervention in our panel. Let's applaud.
Yeah. And I guess see you soon.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Arkadiusz. Thank you, Cathy, for co-creating this, because this event was co-created by Cathy FitzGerald, who had this idea to, if Arkadiusz is not here, so maybe connect him on the phone.
It's a digital conference.
So simple as that. The conference is about technology, more or less. This conference, and what's your starting point when you are trying to tell a story? What's from the technological point of view? What do you need? Do you need any technology, and are your works technology inspired, technology driven, and how in how much extent is that?
I feel like we're going to have completely opposite answers to this, and I wonder whether almost the attempt to find common ground will just trip us up, because I think we're very distinct. So for me, actually, the technology is, in a lot of ways, it's the thing I get out the way, and it's the thing I have to perform a magic trick in that when I'm interviewing someone, I need them to forget about the technology. And I use very simple microphone. I don't use particularly fancy kit. And I edit in Pro Tools, so it really is very simple. I'm not that far away from sitting around the fire telling a story. Whereas you,
Krzysztof, what's your way?
Yeah, so you're right. We are a bit polarized here, probably. In my work and in our work as punk generator, technology is. I think it's a part of a creative process as well. I mean, technology is inspiring us as much probably as art or our ideas. I don't know how to call it, but I think this is a very important part of what we do. But of course, this is not a we're not trying to show up the technology to showcase the technology itself, but rather to find like a sweet spot between using it and forgetting about it, I think. And there is that point probably when you can make something look like it's a little bit magical, and technology helps achieving it. But I think I personally am probably even more into technology than my colleagues from Pangenerator. But at the same time, I kind of understand your point. That was apparent from the very first time you started to talk about your work, that somehow you go over the sound itself, the technology itself, and you the way you forget about what you read under your bedsheet, you kind of forget about that you have a headphones on your ears and just dive into the story. Probably the same is with interviewing people. When they forget that there is that microphone, they can dive into what they want to say. So
yeah, I think there's the American writer George Saunders. He writes these amazing short stories, and recently Lincoln in the Bardo, and he has this beautiful idea about any work of art. He says is a bit like a black box, and it doesn't matter what you put in the black box. You can put anything in the black box. What actually matters is that your audience member, or the person who is experiencing your work of art, enters the black box, enters the black room, and then leaves it. And when they leave it, they are a very slightly different person. They have had an experience that is undeniable and non-trivial, I think he says. And for me, that's what it's about. It's, is the person not to be grandiose, because it's a very tiny thing, but are they slightly different as a result of experiencing your piece or my documentary? Because if they are, I would argue that was a kind of immersion. And I think the technology is always in service of the experience.
Even if you are not using much of the technology yourself, your listeners are most probably in this world. So I'd like to know if you are how deeply you are thinking about your listener's perspective, how he's consuming, how he's going into your audio, and is it even possible nowadays to have this kind of pure audio experience, like in the era of experimental studios, phone connections, and radio at the place of television or even YouTube. So what are your views on this listener's perspective?
Do you want to?
Yeah, because maybe I'll start this time. Thank you. This time I start. I was thinking about this question actually when I've seen it in the mail, and I thought maybe this is a bit too provocative, but I thought it might be the other way around. I mean, the era of listening to something without seeing something is relatively new. I mean, it's only around for about 100 years or so when radio or phonograph were invented. So probably before that, most of the time when you were listening to music, you would always have something to look at and to observe the process of creating the sound. So I think that the move towards visualizing sound right now, or making the process of creating the sound visual, is probably going back to a natural or default situation that wasn't there for many years. But at the same time, I'm also enjoying listening to radio and forgetting about it, that it's somehow unnatural. But yeah, I just wanted to provoke a little bit by posting this perspective on the subject. But, yeah.
I really like that idea. Also because it means that radio isn't just the kind of Cinderella medium. I like the idea that somehow we're a little bit novel, even though we're really not. No, you're giving. We're always. Radio always seems a bit old-fashioned, but I like your way of understanding it.
Relatively so new.
Yeah, no, I like that. I do think about it, and I am very aware of the fact that they might be doing 10 different things while they're listening to me. But we have, there's actually an idea in British radio and probably elsewhere, that if you've done it really, really right, then we say that the listener can't get out of the car. They cannot leave the car. And it strikes me that what we're really saying is, in that particular moment, we've caught their attention so completely that we are demanding that they don't do anything else. And that's our measure of success. So I think that's quite interesting. And the other thing I think is that we always assume that people want a visual, or they're doing doing three things at once. And that's one kind of listener. I can't do that. For me, it's about cognitive load. It's how much am I putting into my brain at any one time. And I'm not a multitasker. There was probably a reason that I work in radio. I like listening to one thing. I will sit in a dark room and listen to a piece. I will listen to a piece of music. And I'm not the only one. So I think there is also, we make this assumption that all listeners are doing 12 things at once these days. They're not.
You mentioned car, which is quite good space to listen to music or radio, actually. But normally we have an access to different types of spaces where you are putting your museum audio guides or your artistic installations, and these are much worse. So how to move people towards the source of sound and let them be a part of the experience.
I think you just have to factor it in. So I made this very strange piece that was, we made a radio antenna out of salt water from the Thames, which is a technology that the US Navy developed. And we made sort of a wooden seat to go around it, and we put it on a boat in the middle of the Thames, an old red lightship, so that people sat on the bench, and as they sat there, they were listening to a piece that was full of people talking about the Thames, why they came to the river, that was full of birds, that was full of foghorns and strange river sounds. And as they sat and listened, cruise ships drifted slowly up the Thames, or birds drifted past. So you got this wonderful thing where it was if the universe had the final mix. And so there's no reason why you can't have both.
Yeah, so you couldn't really tell which sounds are from the recording and which are real. Yeah, this is a great idea of blurring the boundaries. Yeah, so we are in a lucky position probably as moderator because most of the time we set up the sound environment because it's connected to the object itself. So we usually have control over how it sounds. Although we are not audiophiles about it, and we are not and especially for my personal practice, the quality of sound in like a typical understanding of this word is not that important. And we are rather into how do you perceive the sounds and how do you connect it to what you see, and if you understand the process where the sound comes from, and this is much more important than if the sound is super high quality, played on the best possible speakers and best possible acoustic space. So this is of less interest for in our work than content, and also the like a visual. How do you see the process of creating the sound? Yeah, this is probably the aim of what we do. Yeah.
Don't you think that the perception of listeners changed during recent years? Of course, online experience makes them maybe makes it easier to change the audio source, look for visual sound or audio-visual representation of music. Is this a problem for you as you work on your sound works?
I think it's actually quite interesting because in a way it's a golden age of factual documentary in that we've got this massive global podcast boom, and But what's interesting is that they're a very distinct type of program. They tend to be sort of newsy magazine programs or magazine format programs, you know, a host talking to guests. And actually there's this fantastic tradition, European tradition of crafted documentaries that's really like the film documentary tradition. But they take more time. They require a little bit more thought. You know, they might have terrible things like metaphors in them. You know, they're trying to do something a bit more ambitious in some ways. And I think that's interesting in that shift towards podcasting means there's maybe less understanding of that sort of tradition that I belong to. Bastards. Don't
yes,
translate that.
Sorry, I actually have a thought. When you say how the way people listen to something that is sound-based in the era of computers and internet, and actually it reminded me of a study. I couldn't recollect the name of the guy, but he aimed to train AI network to find so-called drop in like dance music songs. So you would often have like a build-up, and then you have boons, boons, boons. So this is so-called drop. And
Can I just come record you making sounds?
Okay. And he tried to just analyze the audio of the pieces of the songs, but he didn't succeed. And then he thought he'd analyze the metadata on the Spotify, that statistics that tell how people skip and fast forward the slider. And when he analyzed that, it came out that most people who listen to this kind of music, they just skip directly to the drop. And then he found it just perfectly in most of the tunes. He could just find the right place just before the. So this is very, like you just said, the way we change our listening, we just go directly to the fragment that is interesting for us. We rather not focus.
But do we go directly to the fragment that is interesting to us because we've heard it previously and we know where that fragment is? And that fragment, the drop, would not be the drop if we didn't know we'd skipped something. The drop is only the drop because you know that you've been waiting.
Yes, because we've been waiting. But
and even if we skip it mentally, we've been waiting. You know, we know what we've.
But do you know, for instance, do you know how people statistically listen to your stories, and if they are looking for the beginning of the vocal narration, and omitting the sound effects maybe that are. I don't.
My stuff. I don't think they could do it because it's so interwoven and it's so. Yeah, they'd have a hard time really, and it's just very, very tightly interwoven. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people who just flick it on halfway through, and that's. I mean, I think my job is. I think I've won if they are cooking and suddenly they are so transfixed, they are leaning on the kitchen surface. And they're not cooking anymore, they're just listening. But I know that I am in a battle of attention.
Okay, we've got this little counter. Actually, it's quite big.
Yeah, it's a little explosive,
to be visible for us. And it tells us that your lunch break is very, very soon. But I wonder if you've got any questions, because this is a right time to ask if you've got it. Of course, the questions to our panelists. Yeah.
For the lady, which type of
For the, yeah, my name is Jakob Landerstrup Jensen. I'm from Denmark, and I'm slightly interested in films myself. But my question is, for the storytelling, what has been your inspiration to your style?
Dickens. So I have a PhD in Charles Dickens, which is completely useless apart from the fact that it was this 4-year apprenticeship with, and my background is all English literature, so I'm just steeped in storytelling like that. But for Dickens, Dickens's work sort of shivers on this boundary between the real and the unreal. You know, it never quite resolves. It's just deeply weird, and Yeah, so, and I think when I get it right, which isn't that often, but when I do, I manage to get a little bit of that deep weirdness.
So, hello, my name is Estefania. I come from Colombia. Well, I am from Colombia, but I come from Denmark as well. And I have one question for each. I was wondering, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. So,
Krzysztof.
Krzysztof, I was wondering what are you trained in? What is your profession? What did you study? Because I'm not sure if you create the machines yourself. Like, do you have a training in mechanical engineering, or how did you come to work in visualizing or making it more analog to see the sound you create or you want to create? And for Cathy, yes, it seems like you're a little bit like you don't want to be part of that digital culture thing in your result. Like you like the idea of people being completely immersed in your result, but I'm guessing that there has to be something that digital cultures impact in the process. And don't you think that maybe it's thanks to the digitalization of the world right now that you're able to reach some of the people you can interview, that you know that maybe this place sounds interesting because you have already heard it somehow thanks to digitalization? Well, that would be, thanks.
Okay, so maybe I'll answer quickly. So yeah, I had a secondary school which was an art school, and for a year I was learning to make string instruments, and then I was learning to sculpt, and then I managed to apply for a music university for jazz department, and also I was always sort of DIYer, so it all kind of connected together. And when I started to work with Pan Generator, I learned a lot of coding from them because they have background in coding as well. So that's why it all combines to this sort of weird stuff. Yeah.
Weird, wonderful stuff. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, yes. I mean, to be honest, yeah, I mean, clearly I couldn't do the interviews that I do without digital technology, and lots of people are listening online. But I suppose it's just that it just doesn't interest me as much as the mechanics of how we tell stories. Because, yeah, it just doesn't interest me as much as the magic of what happens in the room when I'm interviewing someone and I ask the right question. And yeah, what I want is that my kit picks them up perfectly and doesn't break down. But it's about that rapport that I have with them in the moment that is the real thing that will distinguish the thing that I make.
Any more questions?
Lunch.
Okay, so with my microphone, just to... Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. My guests at this panel were Cathy, FitzGerald, Krzysztof Cybulski, and Arkadiusz Reikowski, absent here, but you're gonna meet him this evening probably when his train arrives. Am I right, Anna?
Yes.
I wouldn't be so sure.
Yeah, he said actually he was asking me whether he's going to meet any of you this afternoon when he comes in, so you've seen his picture on the slide, so please feel free to talk to him. Also, if any of you would like to talk to the other experts that you've seen this morning, we have this time slots like tete-a-tete with experts. They called expert stands, or stoliki eksperckie, and I think it's a very unique opportunity to talk with some of our mentors and experts who are here for the conference. I've seen there are a few spots left, so I encourage you to take this opportunity and to go online and register. And right now, please enjoy your lunch and see you in a bit back here. Thanks. Thank you.